Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the World Travel Market Airline Series. This is the third of our events this year, and I think it's going to be a very interesting session. I'm John Strickland of JLS Consulting, and I'm delighted to be here to interview our panelist, our interviewee in just a few moments. I don't know how many of you in the room are aware, but Virgin Atlantic celebrated its 30th anniversary this year. I was surprised myself to realize that amount of time had gone by. I remember in the 1980s seeing this first flight departing to Newark from London Gatwick when Virgin had one aircraft, and now it's pretty amazing to think 30 years later, if we fast forward the video, the airline is a significant player in many, many markets. Having said that, in recent years it's had a number of problems, it's lost quite a lot of money, it's faced a number of competitive challenges, but it's now really at a pivotal moment in its history. It's going to be moving in a new direction. It has a new shareholder, new aircraft coming into the fleet, and as of the last almost 2 years, it has a new chief executive who happens to be an American, which could be a very key factor in terms of the destiny of the company. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Craig Kreeger, Chief Executive of Virgin Atlantic.
Thank you, John.
Craig, welcome to the WTM. I think it's your first visit here.
I think it is too. Thanks for having me.
Great. And let's just mention one thing that I think we should acknowledge. It's a different part of the Virgin Group, Virgin Galactica, but we do offer our condolences on behalf of WTM for the families of the people affected by that, and of course the sad news for the group in its plans to bring space flight to more easily accessibility.
Well, thank you for saying so. Obviously, all of us share your reaction, and I think first of all for the families, and secondly, for the setback that this obviously reflects, and I would just echo Richard's words that the key is to figure out what went wrong, and then plan for the future. Absolutely,
go forward in a positive spirit. Craig, turning to yourself, you're an experienced man in the airline industry. You had more than 20 years working for American Airlines before you took the job with Virgin. Did you find that proposal of the post a surprise? Did you have to think twice before walking from one side of the tracks to the other, as it were?
Well, of course, you always think twice, but actually not for very long. My best way of describing this is that I remember telling many of my colleagues at American that I was taking this role, and a couple of them summed it up best, and it's a feeling has not left me in the almost 2 years I've been here, and that is, they said, "Oh my God, you have the coolest job in this whole industry." And I think that pretty much set the tone, and that's how I felt when I was being approached as well.
Oh, you were based in the States, I guess, largely for American in your career with them.
20 years of the 27 were in the States, but the other 7 were here in London.
So you'd already moved to this side of the Atlantic, so it didn't come as a complete kind of culture shock in a different way of doing business?
No, I felt we've enjoyed our time in the UK. Our daughter has been educated in the British school system, and so that wasn't a challenge that for me or any hurdle whatsoever. I was actually looking forward to that.
But in terms of now coming to work for an essentially British company and based down at Gatwick, did you find there was a different ethos when you walked in the door in terms of the way that business is done day to day?
Well, I don't think there's any question that there's a different ethos between Virgin Atlantic and American Airlines or any large U.S. company. I'm not sure I would ascribe it all to Britishness. Right. I think it's its own culture, it's its own environment, it has its own spirit and pride and style, and in a lot of ways, I get asked a lot, well, how could someone who obviously fit well in an American Airlines culture possibly fit in a more free-spirited culture like this one? And I guess, on the one hand, I guess it's a fair question. On the other hand, it presumes that my natural personality didn't have to make compromises to fit into a more structured environment. And frankly, actually, I find this to be, in many ways, more comfortable.
And I guess Sir Richard himself, is still actively involved in the airline, takes a more than keen interest in what the business is up to.
Well, Richard has been, the majority shareholder of this company for its entire history. And I think unlike most of the other Virgin businesses that have grown and incubated, and Richard has sold off majority stakes in, this one he obviously remains close to his heart. And so he is a very keen traveler on our airplanes and is quite frequent to offer suggestions and improvements. I don't think Richard's ethos has ever strayed, nor do I think the company's has from its original reason for existence, and that was how can we make things better for customers? And that's the lens that I hear from Richard most frequently on.
Now, aside from the personality issues and the different culture, obviously it was a great opportunity that you decided to take, but did you know the financial state the business was in before you started, or did you get some rather unpleasant surprises when you began to look at the books in more detail as you took up the reins?
No, I had a pretty clear understanding of where the company was when I started. I would say maybe not so much in the first interview, but over the course of the several that I had, it was laid out very, very clearly. And to be perfectly clear, while the company has indeed struggled over the last several years, it was also very clear the day I took the job that many of the key decisions that would position the company for success had already been made. And there was more to be done, but there was executing excellently the things that were on the plate. The company had lacked a strong US partner. It had an old, well, not really old, but certainly a fuel inefficient and economically inefficient fleet. And the Delta deal had just been signed, the 787s were on the way, and I saw a real opportunity for this company to be hugely successful, and that's exactly what we're going to make happen.
Well, that's why when I mentioned it in the opening comments about perhaps it's particularly relevant that you are an American, because that shareholder deal had just happened not that long before you joined. It's perhaps questionable about whether there was really a natural fit between Singapore Airlines and Virgin. So perhaps didn't come as a surprise when there was a change, and now it looks completely different. It would seem a natural fit.
Well, I have to say, first going back to the relationship with Singapore, if you think of the relationship we have with Delta and with Singapore, Singapore's relationship was a shareholder relationship. And as shareholders, from my experience in interacting with them, they were excellent shareholders and board members. They were engaged in the business. They were good to bounce ideas off of. They understood the airline and therefore were good advisors. But we didn't have the other element that we have with Delta, which is a joint venture in the complementary and overlapping nature of our networks. And so, sometimes when airline transactions happen, and I could certainly list some of those, you kind of ask, well, how's that going to work? And sometimes when airline transactions happen, you think, well, what took so long? And I think this one was one of those that as a longtime competitor to Virgin Atlantic and to Delta, it just looked like these guys could be so much more effective, each of them, transatlantically, if they were working together. And I'm happy to say that was an accurate perspective.
Well, of course, all the US carriers, I mean, let's be untypically British and use that brutal phrase and say they could have been seen in the past as basket cases, Delta included, because they'd all been through this bankruptcy protection, Chapter 11, a number of times. But having given that rather glib comment, I mean, Delta had come through seemingly with shining colours. Plus, they'd already merged some years earlier with Northwest, and if we look at the kind of the grief, the human grief that can be involved in mergers, that one is seen as a textbook example of success. So they were already in very good shape when they went to take that shareholding. Has there been a risk that they could have such a high degree of exuberance that they want to push you in a direction you don't want? And again, coming back to you being an American, knowing the difference in style of doing business, has that helped you to navigate that you get your influence as you need to?
I guess there's a lot of interesting questions mixed in that one, John, as I think about that. First of all, they clearly, I don't think, I mean, you gave a sentence to it, but I think that is the most amazingly executed merger in it's not just a textbook example, it is the only textbook example of a truly successful integrated merger where two companies came together, got logical synergies, employees on side, and have delivered results for customers and for the business. Really an amazing story. And it speaks to, I think, the ethos of Delta. And while Delta's style will never be Virgin Atlantic's style, the people and customer ethos of that company actually is something we're proud to work with. And they have recognized from the very get-go, in every conversation I had with them, including an interview with them before I took the job, that what they need from Virgin Atlantic is to effectively compete with British Airways on this side of the ocean and augment their ability to compete with American on the other side of the ocean. And they have recognized from the get-go that being distinctly Virgin Atlantic is the only way we can do that. And so I've not felt pressure to change anything because of Delta's exuberance. I felt just the opposite, exuberance for what we bring to their network, and that has made that relationship quite easy to get rolling from my perspective.
And one technical point, let's just head this off. I mean, the EU's been looking at foreign ownership in EU carriers. Some airlines have been complaining about influence of outside carriers, be they Gulf carriers or US. Where are we on that one? Is that resolved yet, or is it something you've still got to give an answer to?
Yeah, the answer is I don't actually know where we are. I've given it almost 0 minutes of thought. Every discussion I've had with any government officials, on the CAA in particular, and even in the EU, have led me to conclude that we are part of a broader exploration or investigation, not because there's any concern with how we're governed, but in the sense of ensuring that it's perceived to be a fair and equitable process across all airlines. And we've gone through a number of hoops with the CAA to assure them, and I have no doubt that same thing will happen in this case. I'm very confident that my amount of thought that I've given to this is exactly the right amount.
Okay. Now, in the early stages of this cooperation, I mean, it takes time to bed in joint schedules with airlines, but already you took early steps in Heathrow, and we'll talk about Heathrow later as a separate topic, to move flights together into Terminal 3 on some of the routes. You also went through a very key piece of business activity to set up a joint venture, which means that you can completely cooperate on your scheduling, pricing, and promotion of routes, and that again requires regulatory approval, which you've got. So just tell us a bit more about what that means, because joint ventures, again, I think it was Northwest and KLM who had the first one, maybe 15, 20 years ago, but we hear about them more and more between different airlines, including your old employer, American and BA have one.
So I think if you step back and start with, so where's the value in a joint venture, both for the business and for customers, and then you can work your way through how you make that happen. So the value from the business perspective, which will lead to some of the customer benefits from Virgin Atlantic, is a joint venture with Delta offers us really two fundamental things. The first thing, for our UK-based customers, it offers a much broader network of destinations that we can offer one-stop service to, connecting through Delta hubs on the other side of the ocean. And a great example of that is our flights to JFK connect to 44 different Delta destinations, many of which we would not have served with our code previously. So the joint venture starts with offering customers a broader network from the UK. Equally important, and in our case maybe even more important, from the US, where our relative size is somewhat limited. So if you live in Los Angeles, for example, it would be pretty hard for you to be a loyal, truly loyal Virgin Atlantic customer unless your only destination was London, because from Los Angeles, that's the only place we fly. But Delta obviously has many destinations served out of Los Angeles, and their frequent flyer base and their corporate account relationships and their travel agency programs can encourage their customers who might have previously chosen BA and American or even United when they went to London to fly on Virgin Atlantic. And so our share from the United States, because of the strength of their distribution, will rise, or has risen even. And so from a business perspective, those are the two clear value adds from a joint venture partner that frankly we'd seen BA and American realize as a result of their cooperation at our expense. And so it was really essential for us to make progress from both points of sale for the reasons I described. But the way to actually make it work and generate more loyalty is actually to make the experience customers have flying through your networks better and better and better. The word seamless gets used a lot. I think we're a long way as an industry from truly seamless inter-airline connectivity, but you can do things that make it much, much simpler. So locating in the same terminal with the flights that go to the same destinations is a good starting point. And so for customers who are flying to New York on Virgin Atlantic or on Delta, if they get to the airport early or their meeting runs late and they want to change flights, they're already in the right terminal. They go to because now we fly all of our New York flights. All the flights that we fly to the same place from London are served in the same terminal, and in as many airports as we can, but certainly in New York, we are in the same terminal on that end as well with Delta. So trying to make things easier for customers is a way of kind of supercharging the value we get from putting the two networks together. And ultimately, I think from the trade perspective, selling jointly effectively which never is as quick as I think any of us would love. It takes a little while to get joint programs working and to move business, but is the next sort of big value add. And from my experience, it takes 2 to 3 years to reach something like steady state, and we're 10 months in at this point. So I see great things from that relationship, and I think it's been very rewarding to see the Delta customers showing up at our check-in and in our clubhouse and experiencing Virgin Atlantic service, and how excited they've been with that.
Because a route like New York, I mean, it's seen as, out of Heathrow in particular, seen as a real blue-ribboned route, not only for the sense of prestige for the sake of it, but profitability. And as you said, American and BA got to this point when it became almost like a bus service, when they could coordinate their schedules and not have them competing too close together. And you've now been able to do the same thing, so that's got to be a massive.
We have, and it's really, I mean, again, this all comes back to making it convenient for customers. When we in Delta first started, our schedules were basically all at the same times as each other. So while we might have had 7 trips between Heathrow and JFK and a couple between Heathrow and Newark, they were certainly not timed optimally for customers. Mm-hmm. But effective last May, by moving them around and ensuring that we now covered the day effectively, while we certainly don't have as many flights as British Airways and American, we now have the entire day covered with very convenient service, and we think now offer a really good competitive alternative.
And you've done recently what you're calling metal swaps, where I think starting this season, where routes that were flown by Delta, we're going to physically see a Virgin liveried aircraft and vice versa.
So this season we started with Delta flying one of the Los Angeles trips from Heathrow and us flying one of the Atlanta trips. And I think it's a great, to the extent that there is loyalty on one side of the ocean to one carrier versus another, having a mixed set of alternatives should give customers the best of both worlds. And we're off to a great start in Atlanta. I haven't seen the detailed numbers yet because it's all of a few days old, mm-hmm. but I was on the inaugural, so it was, and that was definitely a good start.
Great. And some of your competitors have said, well, once this Delta deal was done, the name of Virgin would disappear. I did hear Sir Richard in an interview the other day saying, he didn't say over my dead body, but I mean, he said it's not going to disappear. And I think I've heard Delta people saying the same. So you remain confident that that identity is going to still be around?
Some competitors have definitely said that, at least one I can think of. Yeah. And look, I think it's very, very clear for the reasons I articulated mm-hmm. previously that Virgin Atlantic it continues to be run for the interests of Virgin Atlantic, and most importantly, the only way we compete successfully is by being Virgin Atlantic.
Okay, let's just look at another couple of elements of this. You've had to take some tough decisions under your watch on network. Let's look at two aspects, long haul, short haul. Long haul, I mean, Virgin over the years built up from that first flight, which was to, I think, Newark, if I remember rightly. Was it Newark or was it Miami?
No, it was Newark.
It was Newark some 30 years ago. To being present in many global markets, albeit perhaps on a limited basis, like one flight a day to Australia and other parts of Asia, Africa, and so on. You've recently given the news of cutting about 4 of these destinations that are non-US and beefing up the US program. What's the thinking behind that? Is that a reluctant departure from some of these markets?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is, one of my observations on airlines, and it's not unique to Virgin Atlantic, is you do kind of fall in love with the stuff you do. I mean, you've invested a lot of time, a lot of energy, you've hired people, you've got customers, and making decisions to pull out of a market is a very difficult thing to do. But you can always tell when you've got too many of them when people talk about routes that are strategic. Strategic actually is a euphemism for loses a lot of money. I mean, you wouldn't need to put a strategic label on it if it was actually profitable. And so part of the exercise of taking a look at an airline is to say, you know what, it might be okay to have a couple of strategic routes that you think will grow over time, or that the relationships of the customers who fly to those routes fly on lots of other routes, and so you want to keep them loyal. But you can't have a lot of them. And frankly, the decisions we made were not about a desire to move our airplane, to move assets from one region of the world to another. They were explicit and thorough evaluations of, is this route profitable? Will it ever be profitable? And if no, is it so strategically critical that it would damage the network or the brand to pull out? And putting things through those lenses led to the decisions that we made. Now, those decisions were made easier by the fact that with a partner on the US side helping to fill up our airplanes, we have some opportunities, and we're performing better in those markets than we did prior. And so it wasn't a goal to move more assets to the United States. I would have loved it if Beijing and Sao Paulo had jumped to the top of the forecast list, because those are markets that I think would be great markets for Virgin Atlantic to add at some point. But it was pretty clear that in looking at the market size and our likely success in those markets, we were better served to enter two other kinds of markets. New services in markets that are performing well, so those additional flights to Miami or Boston, or San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York, or adding flights to Delta's hubs where we have new connecting opportunities to offer, so new markets we could offer our customers that we thought would do very well. And in the end, those just came to the list because they're going to do better, not because of a strategic goal. And actually, we're now back to about the same percentage of our network being transatlantic as it was in 1999 and 2000, which were two of the best years this company ever had. And I think will work out really well.
Well, it would seem to me, as you said, the name is Virgin Atlantic, has been since the beginning. Sir Richard, coming from a background of music, media, and so on, the identity, it seems to me, is strong of Virgin in the States and in the UK in a way that you didn't have a muscle to be able to do in maybe other parts of the world. I mean, you're now focusing back on core strengths.
I think focusing on core strengths is a good description. I also think that the question, what we have to ask ourselves, we have to run the business as a business. And I think we're a UK-based airline. Our biggest customer base is the British traveling public, and where our service and style and nonstop in particular can be successful and is critical for UK travelers, we need to be in those markets, whether they're going the other direction or they're going to the United States. And so while it is true that we've pulled out of some markets, we still fly to places like Hong Kong, Shanghai, Johannesburg, Lagos. We didn't move our entire network to the US. We looked at the markets objectively and drew the conclusions we drew.
And on the short-haul side of the tracks, I mean, if we look at Little Red, which is going to be no more, I mean, some people, maybe unkindly, you'd think called it Little Dead, even though it's still alive.
I have not heard that one before.
You haven't heard it. It's around some of the industry, news wires and things, or chat forums. But there was a reason for bringing that airline into existence, because you needed some short-haul feed, which you got from British Midland and was sold to IAG, although Virgin would have liked to acquire it. Tell us a bit about what's happened there, Kreeger. Why are you deciding to call it a day next year with this short-haul operation?
Well, I guess the simple answer is we used the same lens that I described for the rest of our network to evaluate the Little Red route network as part of that network. And while we'd seen steady growth in our overall traffic numbers, we'd seen a slowing down in the growth of connecting traffic, which really needed to grow a fair amount more for this to really make sense economically. A couple of things have happened in the time that we've had Little Red that made it even harder. One of them is we've seen so many more connecting customers from Delta than we had forecast, so the need for the connecting customers was not quite as great as it was originally. And we've got more than our fair share of the local markets, so we'd been competing, I think, very effectively. And in the end, we drew the conclusion that it just wasn't going to get there. And I get asked occasionally whether we look back and we regret that decision. And I suppose once something has failed, and you've made the decision to exit it, inevitably you'd wish you'd made the other decision. But you don't make 100% of the shots you don't take. And I think Virgin Atlantic has a great ethos of trying stuff. And in fact, I've tried to get our company, as we think about innovation and taking advantage of the fact that we're now financially stable and we should be looking at where should we go next. I think we need to fail more often, because that's the way you're going to have the huge successes occasionally. And so, the Little Red routes in the end didn't prove to be successful. I think we gave it a fair shot, and the good news is the company is overall performing where we need to be, or we're on the direction towards where we need to get to.
Okay. You touched on the fleet which Virgin has had over time. Looking at, obviously, the long-haul operation has been the trusty 747, the A340. There was a time when you'd have the logo on the side of the aircraft, 4 engines for long-haul, which was probably a good selling point in the past, but the world is going twin on long-haul. You've seen the A330 coming through into your fleet in larger numbers, and of course the 787, we'll ask you a bit about that. Tell us about that change in fleet structure. What is that going to mean to you in terms of, again, economics, customer perception?
Well, look, on the customer side, the A340 has been a very, very good aircraft. But obviously economically and environmentally and noise, in many other ways, that isn't a fleet that is ready to move on. And the 787s we have on order, 21 of them, will replace the entirety of our A340 fleet, plus our Heathrow 747 fleet. And in addition, of course, to the obvious fuel savings, they save about 30% of the fuel we'd use on a comparable route with an A340. They're 60% quieter, and obviously with all the issues around Heathrow and Heathrow expansion, working to become a quieter airline and a more fuel-efficient airline, I think is an end goal of itself. And to do it in a way with an aircraft that customers love is going to make it even better. And so it's a fairly historic fleet replacement program. Within a 4-year period from today, we should end up with about 60% of our fleet being 787s. And so we are going through a very rapid transition to a really great customer airplane. And I think it will be another kind of launching point for energy around Virgin Atlantic.
Well, and the 787, you've got the version 787-9, which is bigger than the first version of the 8. Has that started in service in a better way than we saw originally with the 787, where there were numerous problems and customers were enduring a lot of frustration?
Well, without question, having taken the second variant of this aircraft, we've benefited from all of the work Boeing has done along the way to make the 787-8 reliable, has now been built into the -9. And we're not the only, we took the fourth -9, but the other airlines that are operating it are already seeing aircraft reliability numbers that are consistent with 2 to 3 years down the line of a new aircraft rollout. So the bottom line is all the work that's been done to get to this point really benefits us for our first airplane. And it's one airplane, it's in service, but it's not even in service full time, as we're also using it for pilot training to be prepared for the second, third, and fourth, which all come reasonably quickly through the first couple of months of next year. So it is, like I said, it's part of a very rapid transition, and no question, the aircraft's performing excellently.
And the 787, even the 9, which is the bigger of the two versions, you mentioned it will successively replace 747s, which is quite a bigger aircraft. How will you manage that in terms of, again, these precious slots at Heathrow? You don't want to end up with a fleet where you're providing substantially less capacity over time.
Well, to be fair, we only have less than a handful of 747s we operate out of Heathrow. But it is actually a smaller aircraft than the A340-600 as well in terms of number of seats. So we will, on a seat basis, be a slightly smaller airline as we proceed. The fact is that there could be, therefore, some opportunities for growth over time, and I'd like to think that will have the economic performance as a company to be able to justify that.
And just to touch on that point again, you do have in the background some options on A380s, and there's always speculation about if, when, what will you do with those? Can you comment on that?
Well, I've been very candid publicly, and I'll continue to be, that having those options in the event the world changes in a way that it makes sense to take the A380 is always something nice to have. Our next fleet decision is to look at replacing our Gatwick 747 fleet. And I think we still have to decide what the right airplane that fits that. I think the A380 is probably still not the most likely candidate, but I think there are definitely there are aircraft that could be good candidates that having those 380 options could be useful, like an A350 or more 787s or I suppose 777s. Those would be the three most likely scenarios for us to take to replace the Gatwick fleet. And we'll probably make that decision in the next, say, 5 to 9 months.
Okay. And I remember we had a chance to talk recently. I remember you told me then that the 747 is still a very good aircraft on some of these leisure routes like Florida that you would fly out of, say, Manchester, Scotland or Gatwick. And in terms of the costs it can deliver, it compares very well with a lot of the new generation aircraft.
It was very tempting when I first got to Virgin Atlantic to kind of take if I can slightly paraphrase Animal Farm and do it backwards, 4 engines bad, 2 engines good. But actually, the 747, when you get enough seats on that airplane, has very good per seat costs. And our Gatwick fleet in a leisure configuration, which with a smaller upper class cabin, actually produces very good results. Customers love it. We've recently refurbished it. It's got a new entertainment system on board, and the combination of good customer proposition and good economic costs. It's not an urgent problem to replace the 747s at Gatwick. It's an airplane that makes sense in the leisure markets we fly it.
Let's just touch on another area of the business, your product. I mean, Virgin, when it came along, was a real challenger, maverick airline. The whole concept of originally delivering a business class that was like other airlines' first classes. Then I think Virgin was first to bring in the idea of a premium economy as well. Is your product still up to scratch? Is it still delivering, what people expect? You're filling seats and people are satisfied, whatever cabin they're in.
We still score top of the table at transatlantic business class and economy class customer service ratings. I'd like to think that we could grow that gap as we take new airplanes and we invest in new technology. And having now flown on our 787 and knowing it'll be the majority of the fleet in the not too distant future, I'm pretty confident that the combination of the upper class product, the premium economy, which it's a pretty good sized step up on the premium economy product, and even the economy seat, which I flew on the inaugural, I think we stand ourselves in very good stead.
Now, you mentioned about the desire to grow in the future, both in terms of the aircraft and the markets coming back into maybe some parts of the world that you are just vacating. Tell us a bit more about that. Do you envisage doing that as a still essentially UK-based airline, or might you look to other places to establish bases in the future? And then I'll lead, after you've just said something about that, into the whole capacity issue in
Well, look, I think the answer is I think we're a UK-based airline. I think it's very challenging for any airline to take on local national carriers in markets that your brand is not already hugely strong in. So I think we've got enough opportunities to continue to find them in the UK that we're unlikely to pursue starting a base someplace else. So I think the short answer is that to the extent we have growth opportunities that I'm contemplating now, it's additional UK growth.
And in terms of a London market, we're still awaiting the outcome of this government airport commission or government-backed airport commission to look at the issue of capacity at London area airports. What is your view about how that might pan out, and what do you think should happen both for Virgin and for the UK?
Well, I think one of the things that as I was thinking about chatting today that kind of struck me as we talked about the 30th birthday of our company happening this year is, frankly, we could have had this exact same discussion the day this airline was founded, 30 years ago. It had still been 20 years at that point since the last runway had been added, and here we are 30 years later, and we've seen hubs develop around the world in cities that are far smaller than London and effectively create commerce and tourism for those societies. Places like Amsterdam and Dubai being top of the list, but even Istanbul and Qatar. So it's a fairly amazing, I think, failing of the UK to this point to recognize the role that aviation can play in developing tourism and business linkages between countries, or to some extent it's taken for granted. And so it's very clear to me that what the UK really needs is a single large hub in the southeast, and that the most economically sensible way to do that would be to add capacity at Heathrow. But I have no sense of whether it will happen, and nor do I know exactly what's best for Virgin Atlantic, because one of the things I worry about is that how will the new capacity be allocated? I think if it's allocated in a way that looks out for ensuring that customers get the best benefit possible and that competition is maximized, that will be consistent with our ethos, and that's something we would root for very much. But I don't really know how it will, if it happens, which I hope. I don't know how it will end up transpiring, and I'm pretty confident. No, I'm 100% certain that I won't still be working when it happens. As I've said in other places, I'm hoping to actually just be alive at that point.
And are you personally engaging very much with the airport commissioner? Are you speaking to Sir Howard Davis and his team?
I have spoken to Howard on a couple of occasions, and I think it's a very difficult challenge he has. I think it's impossible to separate the business challenge, what's best for UK Inc., from the political challenge of what will there be courage to implement. And so I've certainly read others who've said, well, they've given up hope. And I haven't reached that point yet, but I'm at least skeptical or cynical about it.
And so some people would say that the future is going to be moving away from hub airlines. Part of what you described as your strength is the hub power that Delta brings as a shareholder on the US side of the tracks. But what about, we see long-haul low cost in embryonic form, Norwegian in particular, the jury's still out. What do you think that is going to become a bigger part of specifically the North Atlantic market?
Well, I don't know whether it will or it won't be a specific part. I don't really know how well Norwegian is doing in flying its long-haul services. And obviously, we view them as a competitor. We think we offer a great value proposition with what we offer in the markets where we compete with them. How that will unfold, it is very, very hard for me to say. I don't think, though, it changes really I don't think it changes the basic economics of our business, which is more new markets will be added when there are customers who are transiting added to the customers that are in the local market to create demand to fly to new places. The value of hubs will not, there may be new markets that can be flown economically point to point by either low-cost carriers or more efficient airplanes, but there will always be even more value out of adding connecting customers to create new markets that otherwise wouldn't be big enough to be served. And I think that I've had a number of politicians say, well, we fly all the same destinations are flown out of London Heathrow that are flown out of Amsterdam. So why do we need a bigger hub? Because we've already got all of that. And I think the answer is because London is probably about a 10 times, certainly 5 times bigger city than Amsterdam. There are cities that are not flown out of Amsterdam and are today not flown out of London that would clearly justify nonstop service if we had a decent enough infrastructure to support it. Cities in China we've never heard of. Cities in Brazil. I don't know. I'm not sure what all the new places would be. It's so far in the future, we haven't bothered to do any forecast to figure out where that would be, because the soonest it can be, you can even imagine it, is 20 years from now. Pretty hard to predict what the growth cities will be 20 years hence. But I do know that London as a city should have more, because of its size, more destinations, more capacity, bringing more people back and forth to this country than any other country in Europe. And that's what I think we're missing out on, that we aren't placing a value on the opportunity cost because we don't see it. And I think that's where the opportunity lies.
Craig, just touching on some of those countries and carriers that you mentioned, where airport capacity is growing and where airline capacity is growing, what about the Gulf carriers? What is your perspective on them? Again, we hear a lot of divided opinion. There are those who get in the Gulf carriers camp, others are not so favorable. I think even your opposite number at Delta has expressed some very strong views in terms of the Gulf carriers and their growth.
Well, I think all of us have concerns about whether or not the playing field is level. But I think from my role at Virgin Atlantic, we're very focused on figuring out how do we'll just sort of take the landscape as it is as a given and assume that that's not going to change. Or to the extent it changes, it'll only be growth. And therefore, we have to look at competing successfully in an environment where the Gulf carriers are bigger and as they've planned to be, and make sure that we offer a value proposition and in a way that customers will choose us in the markets that make sense for a British airline to fly nonstop. That is, that has the proposition we have. And I don't spend a lot of time sitting here worrying about what will competition with the Gulf carriers do. I guess in many ways, we're a little bit lucky that there's no land mass that's likely to be a gigantic hub between the UK and the United States, where 70% of our capacity goes. So as long as that stays true, I think we've got a niche that we can win in, and we need to fly to the other cities that go the other direction, where nonstop service is valued, and where a connection is not going to succeed relative to that, and we make sure we'll do that.
Just one last question from me, Craig, and then give the ladies and gentlemen opportunity to pose some other questions to you, because I'm sure there's going to be plenty. What about the regulatory environment? We've seen open skies between the US and Europe, and indeed between Europe and a number of other countries. But recently, for example, Virgin wanted to get into the market to Russia, to Moscow, and there it was a traditional regulatory environment, and another carrier got that capacity. What is your feeling about the way that's going? Are you pushing people to become more liberal in a number of markets?
Well, as an airline that and as a person who believes that the competition is healthy, the artificial constraints that prevent it are by their very nature less good for customers, and in some cases have restricted opportunities for our company. We believe fundamentally that that customers deserve the unfettered benefit of competition. They deserve, an economic model that allows growth, and they deserve a tax environment that doesn't stunt travel and tourism. And when we look at that combination of regulatory factors, we're a long way from where we need to be.
Great, thanks, Craig. Let's go to the floor. If you'd like to ask a question, just stick your hand up, and we'll get a mic to you. If you could just introduce yourself. There's a mic just coming to you, sir, and then we'll go to the second one here.
Oliver Bennett of Salon Consulting. A couple of weeks ago I went to a presentation by a senior member of British Airways staff where the general message was that the introduction of the 787 and the A380 wasn't a simple aircraft introduction. They were having to transform the whole business to cope with the sheer amount of data that was coming out of these new aircraft. I wonder if you had a similar experience with the 787.
Well, I suppose to some extent, we're in the early days to be able to answer that question. We've taken one, and it's flown 4 round-trip revenue services. But I did actually stop by our operations center to kind of talk to them actually last week about the information that the aircraft provides and how we could utilize it. And I think it is mostly upside for us. We have benefited obviously from beginning this process 2.5 years after others have, and we've watched what they have done and worked with Boeing to try and ensure that we are able to take advantage of as much of this as possible. I think we're barely scratching the surface at this point on utilizing. So to give some examples to kind of, as a customer-focused airline, some of the data we get, like ability for our cabin crew to transmit an inoperable seat. So if a seat won't recline, that we get that information while the airplane's in flight. So that when the airplane gets to where it's going, we know which seat we need to do something about. If we need to get people or parts lined up, we might actually have a few hours head start, and we can actually improve the aircraft's performance for customers by taking advantage of data that is transmitted in flight about the customer experience. The same thing, of course, is true for mechanical performance. And I think building up with one airplane, actually, we've not found any problems as you've described. One airplane we can manage the amount of data. But we do need to build some automation capabilities to be able to I can see once we get to 5 and 6, it's gonna require some changes to our processes to ensure that we take advantage of it.
Great. Next question.
Malcolm Ginsberg, Business Travel News. Hope you got that. Craig, 2 questions and 2 different aspects. One, the little red thing, which obviously you're contracted to run till next year. Can you tell us what the situation is regarding the slots? And in your view, whether there is going to be another airline on it, because it gives British Airways the monopoly, and you'll obviously lose the interlining traffic. So that's the number one. The other interesting point is the Delta relationship. You've got 2 distinct products there. I believe you've now got a free limousine service, I think, with Delta has now. I apologize. But I may have that slightly wrong. Do you think there's going to be people who will specifically go for Delta or Virgin Atlantic because of this product differentiation?
So let's take the first question first. So we will be operating Little Red. The slots are actually, just to be clear, the Little Red flights we fly are 3 Manchesters, 3 Aberdeens, and 6 Edinburghs. And so that's 12 slots. 9 of them, the Aberdeens and Edinburghs, are remedy slots, and were granted to us from British Airways to use on these routes specifically. The 3 Manchester slots are actually our own slots from our regular portfolio and returned to us to be able to use on long-haul services if we wish. So the Manchester slots, very, very clear. They're an opportunity for us to conceivably grow some stuff at Heathrow, and we haven't yet made any definitive decisions on how we'll use those. The Aberdeen and Edinburgh, your second question is a relevant question. Will any other airline choose to apply for those remedy slots? The EU is obviously very keen as a part of this process to create an open process for those to apply. I don't really have a strong sense yet whether anybody will or will not do so. And obviously I hope someone will, but and we'd be very happy to consider partnering with them in the event they do. But at this point, I'd just be speculating. I don't really have any sense one way or the other.
Craig, just an observation on that before you go to the second question. I think the dynamic has changed, hasn't it, in terms of short-haul travel in the UK, where Heathrow, maybe 30 years ago when Virgin was born, Heathrow was the biggest airport in terms of, for example, London-Scotland traffic, but now with the rise of low-cost carriers, we're seeing it dispersed around other airports, which would make it harder for another airline to perhaps come in if they don't have your long-haul network.
But if they know that we'll offer a connecting service,
if they could work with
maybe
you,
they could certainly make it attractive. I would also add that both from places like the US and the Middle East to these airports, there have become more nonstop services, even our own. So from Manchester now, or our announced plans, we fly to Orlando, Las Vegas. We will be adding Atlanta, and Delta will be adding at JFK. So ourselves need less of the Manchester connecting traffic as we are flying to Manchester routes that look like they make sense. And we've seen other airlines enter some of the other markets. So, I'm all about, we got to do what's right for our business, but I certainly hope that we'll offer ultimately find a way to offer some form of competition, and clearly some of our Manchester nonstops will do just that.
Okay, the other question was about the limo service harmonization.
So I don't believe Delta has actually made a decision to offer a free limo service, but there are a number of other product differences between us and Delta. Even just the style of service and the personality is a difference. The bar on board the airplane is a difference. The clubhouse and what you get there versus a different lounge. And so we expect customers to have some different preferences of one airline versus another. And I think that's fine. That's exactly why we've chosen to create some mixed markets where customers could choose one or the other. And I think we can do better together by offering each of our own unique products, as long as we are very clear in the selling process to any customer of what airline they're flying on. And that really is, I think, the key thing for us, is to make sure when you book a Delta-coded ticket on Virgin Atlantic, you know it's a Virgin Atlantic flight. And if you book a Virgin Atlantic-coded ticket on Delta, we have to be very clear and communicate that it's a Delta flight, so customers' expectations are met as a consequence.
Okay, question over there.
Yeah, hi, it's Robert Wall with the Wall Street Journal. Two questions. One, just a follow-up on the London Gatwick. Just if you could remind us how many planes you're looking at ordering. And the other one, more strategic, when you're looking at your future routes, particularly those not transatlantic, so presumably going east from here, how does the tie-up with Delta maybe make you look at different routes? Whereas, maybe Cape Town was great for the UK market, but Delta is, saying, if you consider the Delta feed, you might say somewhere else is more interesting.
Let's remind. So the first question was fleet size. So we have 7 747s which operate out of Gatwick today, and those aircraft begin to come off lease in sort of the 2019 period. And so the next aircraft order we would be looking at would be to replace those aircraft and to have some options for growth. And that's so to be determined on how many on the options for growth, but the definitive replacement would be 7. And your second question with regard to feeder traffic, it is absolutely true that in looking at our route network now, we are taking into account expected feed from Delta and from our own new services to the US in assessing markets that would make sense for us to be adding capacity or adjusting capacity. It hasn't caused anything yet to pop up that is different than what we were looking at, but it was one of the factors as we assessed each route we were keeping versus each route we were leaving. Part of the assessment of whether it would become profitable if it wasn't was how did we see feed growing on those routes. And so I think it is going to be a consistent part of our analytic process, just as cargo is. We don't talk a lot about cargo, but every route we analyze, we're looking at how big is the cargo market and how much will we generate there. And it's, all of those things are part of the process of making a network decision.
Okay, we have a question somewhere down the back, I think. Is that right? Do you want to ask your question?
Hi.
Hi.
Yes.
Where am I looking?
Yeah, my name is John Houston from Airport to Lodge. I would like to ask if you could tell us any reason why Virgin pulled out from the West African state Ghana. Just before the health issue started, was there any sign or you perceive any problem happening before you pull out, leaving the monopoly for British Airways?
Well, one, obviously, what's gone on with Ebola has been just a devastatingly horrible thing, and we still don't know exactly where that moves to. But I will say, no, we had no advance warning. Much like I described the other process, we were looking at Accra for some time. It was, in many ways, that route was entered before I arrived, and we flew it for a couple of years. And if you look back on the assumptions that were made when the route was added about economic growth in Ghana and growth in traffic between the UK and Ghana, and the forecast for how much share we would get of that traffic, actually our share performance was not the issue. We got about what we expected, but what we saw was the GDP in Ghana was less than half of what was anticipated for the 3 years we operated it, or including the year we were planning and the 2 years we operated it, and the amount of traffic therefore just did not materialize. So it was done purely based upon actual performance, not based upon any advanced knowledge of anything else going on in the world. I certainly had not, at the time we made the Ghana announcement, I had not heard anything about any health warnings whatsoever. Maybe you knew of them, but I certainly didn't.
Okay, another question down here, then we'll go a couple over here and another one here.
Hi, Greg. This is Andreas Schulz from Consultant Aviation and Tourism. Concerning Europe, Central Europe, are there any plans of Virgin to attract more prime traffic, high-yield traffic, business travelers via London to the US? And having in fact that, of course, Delta is also quite a strong player in Central Europe, but have you got your own plans to stimulate this high-yield business from Europe via London?
Well, I think I'm not going to keep coming back to airline to Heathrow capacity as the answer for everything about our future plans, but in this particular case, any future plans for us with regard to Central Europe, or really Europe in general, are always going to be a question about partnership, because we have the slots we have, and it's never going to make more sense for us to add a short-haul flight than a long-haul flight as an airline. We don't have any short-haul aircraft. We're all wide-body fleet, and so we will not be looking to be adding short-haul to our network. We thought Moscow was an exception, although it's not exactly Central Europe, but it was a market that could make sense with a wide-body, and as a consequence, we looked very closely and were quite disappointed at not getting awarded the Moscow remedy route as part of that process. So the question for Central Europe and any other place is there a good partnership opportunity, either code-share or interline, with carriers that would offer feed opportunities to us? And we look at that constantly, and I think we'll continue to look for those opportunities as we proceed. But I don't think you'll see our own medal there.
Okay, gentleman several rows back, and then a gentleman on the front.
Okay. Andrew Posniak, Green Aviation Solutions. Back in, I think, 2007, Richard Branson made a commitment to reinvest all of the profits of Virgin Atlantic into biofuels research and development. That's probably not happened because of the little or no profits. But
well, I suspect we've invested more than the total profits of the company thus far in that effort, because they're negative.
but in terms of moving forward, whether it's biofuel research and development or sustainability generally, what is the strategy of Virgin? Because it does tend to be seen as a leader in this field, even if it's sometimes more good wishes rather than actual action.
Well, so I'll give you we remain very committed to that mission, and I think maybe the easiest thing for me to do is talk about the one thing that we've continued to focus on over the last couple of years, which is a relationship with a relatively small company called LanzaTech. LanzaTech has invented a technology using a biomaterial that can convert waste gases from steel production. And, if you see steel mills with chimneys and you see flames coming out of those chimneys, that can be captured and instead of burned. And LanzaTech has developed a technology that enables that to be converted to ethanol, which can then be converted into jet fuel. And so we have worked with them to find, and we are planning now for a trial flight with an airplane that will be 50% of that fuel. We've helped them find a financial partner, HSBC, to help support that effort, and we remain very focused as an airline on trying to find. I don't know if that will ultimately be the winning solution, but I think there are lots of investigations and efforts being made by multiple parties to try and find a solution that can produce biologically derived fuel or waste product derived fuel in a way that can be done economically, competitively, or close to competitively with fuel production generally. And I think that is still, it's an open question, but we're going to continue to try and find that thing and lend our support to trying to make it happen. I don't think like I said, we haven't had any money to be investing, but we've invested a fair amount of our energy and our people's energy in that relationship and continue to be very optimistic about it.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, so we've just got 2 more questions. The gentleman here and the lady on the front. If you could pose your question in as fewer words as possible.
The challenge is me answering it in fewer.
Exactly.
I'm Mark Matthews. I work for Avios. So my first question would be, would you consider coming up with a joint frequent flyer program with Delta? And the second one, would you consider, or are you considering joining SkyTeam?
So I won't say no to the would we consider it a joint frequent flyer program, but the programs are very, very different and today have a lot of brand relevance. Our program is very tied into who we are, and Delta's is as well. So we don't have any plans for a joint program. Would we ever consider it? Sure, I think we have to put everything on the table. SkyTeam I can answer as quickly as possible. Maybe eventually, but today we have, with 70% of our capacity flying between the UK and North America, we're very focused on making the Delta relationship successful, and that the sum total, therefore, of all other relationships we could derive around the world, pale in comparison in terms of value to making that successful. So we're focused on that. I would say that we have a number of partners around the world who are very good partners with ours, who might not be able to remain partners with us if we were to join SkyTeam. So in that regard, a SkyTeam decision has pluses and has minuses. And I'm pretty convinced that it will be close, which means it's not an urgent problem to solve. And so we've just kind of said, it's going to be years before we get to that one. We've got plenty of other things to go that I think can drive a lot of value. And that one, we will look at individual SkyTeam partners for sure, and whether or not we ultimately need to make the alliance decision is, I think, an open question and will be for quite some time.
Victoria.
Good morning. Victoria Moores with Air Transport World. 2 quick questions. I think the first one should be a yes/no. Is there any chance that you can source some of the Gatwick 747 replacement from the existing orders that you already have placed?
No.
Told you it'd be a quick one. And the other question is, when Singapore Airlines was up for selling its stake in Virgin Atlantic, did you get any interest in that stake from the Gulf carriers? Because surely, for example, part of the reason why Etihad has gone into Alitalia is to make that transatlantic connection. Would coming into Virgin Atlantic not have been easier?
I have the benefit of not being able to answer that question because I don't know the answer to that question, because I came on board after the Delta deal was announced, and so I don't know whether there were other discussions with other parties. It's been, and I guess I should be a little less flippant with my answer to your aircraft question. If we thought that it made sense for the airline to shrink, which we don't, but if we did draw that conclusion at some point in time, and you decided we didn't want to be as big as we currently are at Heathrow, then clearly you could take some of those airplanes and move them to Gatwick and replace some of the aircraft there. But based upon our current plans, that would make no sense.
Just a quick question from the front here. If you want to ask the question, I'll repeat it because the mics are a long way away at the moment.
Yeah, that's fine. Last week saw the announcement of the Virgin Atlantic first ever future pilot cadet program, which is good news for all aspiring pilots and sort of changed the dynamics of becoming one. My question was, what really prompted that move as opposed to just direct entry for recruitment?
So the question, just to quickly paraphrase you, is Virgin launching a new pilot cadet program rather than just taking direct entry pilots?
Well, we continue to take pilots through the same mechanism we have in the past, with a certain level of qualification. But I think all of us at Virgin Atlantic have become generally concerned that there's not enough, that the long-term sum total of pilots sourced through that means will not collectively be big enough for the entire industry. And so, despite the fact that I think the Virgin Atlantic brand and the fact that we fly all wide bodies and long haul will always mean that we can attract enough pilots, we also felt like this was the right thing to do, consistent very much with some of Richard's other initiatives, to offer the opportunity for people of all kinds of different backgrounds to be able to pursue a dream of being a pilot. And by doing so, we could pick the absolute best young people who had that interest, and I think and do it in a way that gave us a source of incredibly able and Virgin Atlantic loyal future pilots, and we're really excited about it. And the response has been overwhelming. I have to admit, I did not. Someone asked me the other day, did we do it for the PR reason, for the PR of this? And I was kind of mortified because, frankly, I didn't actually expect this to be that big a deal. There are cadet programs all around the industry. This may be the first one that anyone's training directly into a wide body, but it's not. I didn't think of it as a big PR opportunity. I just thought it was a good thing to go do, and it would be a nice source of pilots for us. And we would do roughly 12 pilots every year, and it would just be a consistent way of us recruiting. So I think it's really exciting, and I've been very pleased that, like I said, the response has basically crashed our site, and we're not responding as quickly as we should be to the people who are interested in it. And if you are so, I encourage you to be a little bit patient. We'll catch up and make sure we sift through the applications. I think we will have tens of thousands of applications for 12 positions, which in some ways means we're going to disappoint an awful lot of people. But at the very least, we'll get it off and running successfully.
Just one more quick question from you, sir, at the front.
Craig, I've actually done 3 Virgin flights this month, and so I'm a bit jet lagged. If you'll apologize, I just apologize in advance. For those of us who are frequent flyers with Virgin Atlantic, beyond Richard Branson being the face of the airline, what is Virgin seeking to offer? Because there seems to be, amongst passengers anyway, a sense that Virgin might be losing its identity as Richard gets older and maybe takes a step back. We appreciate that you're the new young face of Virgin Atlantic, but for passengers, what goes on board other than it just being a tube that flies fast?
Well, I hope as a loyal customer that you actually feel there's something that you get that is different at Virgin Atlantic from other airlines.
But it's a feeling. It's a feeling at the moment, and it's less tangible than it could be. And I feel that the other airlines are kind of getting in there.
Well, I think one thing that's clearly true is the whole industry has upped its game. So I think it's fair to, I actually, as I said, I think we are leading in transatlantic customer service ratings, but I suspect not by as much as we did 10 years ago. And I've committed, and the team is committed, to spend £300 million over the next 4 years to really up our game. I think one of the first things that I did when I came on board was recognize that despite the fact that we needed to stabilize the company and therefore become more efficient, we had to make sure that the actions we did consistent with that did not take things away from customers. And I think that's a good start, but that's not the same thing as adding as much as we need to.
But what does that mean? Because now we have to pay for seat selection, and we didn't previously.
But I think you'll find, well, actually, separate from that question, some of the investments are new clubhouses, they are connectivity on board every aircraft, and trying new things like the Google Glass experiment, which we found customers found very engaging, so our people were away from the counter and able to interact with them more directly. Look, I think our people are the magic of the company. So when you describe it as a feeling, I think that is a competitive weapon that we have that no other airline has, the people of Virgin Atlantic. They are extremely committed and loyal to the company and extremely committed and loyal to our customers. My role is to help give them better tools so that they can do that even better. Whether that's more information about them, so I think we probably lag in technology for our people to know more about our customers when they're on board the aircraft, and that's an area we're going to invest in. Or it's new seats and new entertainment systems and Wi-Fi connectivity on board that makes it easier for them to take care of our customers. We have a great team, and my role is to try and help them be able to deliver. And
will you remain sexy, though, which was always the thing?
Well,
one-word answer to that, Craig.
We have got to remain Virgin Atlantic, however you choose to define that. And I think we need to be bright red. I think our new uniforms, our people love our new uniforms. I think it gives them something different to feel about themselves. And one of the things I spoke to a brand new group of cabin crew just a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the feeling that they have upon joining the company. And we hire people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And one of them said to me that, this day, the day I put on my uniform for the first time, it is the most glamorous I have felt in my entire life. And I think that magic, I don't know if sexy is the right word. It's a good word, but I don't know if it's the right word. But that magic feeling of, I represent something that is about delivering myself in my best way possible, representing Virgin Atlantic to our customers, I think is, that's the magic we have to always do.
Craig, I don't think we could have scripted a better last answer for you. Thank you very much for your time today. You're obviously a man who's passionate about his job. You've certainly got your feet under the table. You're tackling a whole host of issues and bringing forward a whole load of new opportunities. So Craig Kreeger, CEO of Virgin Atlantic, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and see you next year for some more airline sessions. Continue to enjoy this year's World Travel Market. Thanks a lot and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.